Ya puede, ya.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you for our panel. And I know that we, unlike the folks in front of us, will be attentive to our time. So, but I also want to say that, you know, some of you folks are moving around, but I think what's happening on this particular panel is so applicable to so many places in the country. We were just talking about it before we came out here. It is represented very clearly here in the microcosm that is Boyle Heights. But this question about what the future is for communities and neighborhoods and how we best embrace the past and bring forward the future is really represented by something that's happening here in this community and particularly in Boyle Heights. And so I want to begin this by talking first with Delmira, who's joined by her translator who's going to help us understand her views. But she is a nearly 40-year resident of Boyle Heights. She's been active in the community there, and she really has a concern about her community's future. When we talk about saving your neighborhood, what does that mean to you? Why is it so important?
Pues porque hay mucha necesidad de vivienda.
Because there is a lot of need for housing.
Hay muchas familias viviendo como unas 3 familias en un apartamento para poder pagar su renta.
Sometimes there are up to 3 families living in one apartment in order to be able to pay the rent.
Porque son familias de muy bajos recursos, la renta ya está alta y no hay vivienda de muy bajos recursos.
Because these are families of low income, these are low income families, and there are no houses, affordable houses.
Entonces, yo vivo en Pico Gardens, en vivienda pública.
I live in Pico Gardens in a public project.
Hubo hace 2 años que nos quisieron privatizar la vivienda.
2 years ago, they tried to privatize the housing area.
Pero gracias a Dios y a las organizaciones, a nuestra iglesia, a José Huizar nos apoyaron y nosotros también como residentes nos unimos todos juntos y luchamos para que no fuera privatizada nuestra vivienda.
So thank God and the public organizations, Mr. Wizard, and we also as a community, we really fought so that they couldn't privatize our housing.
Porque es la única vivienda que tenemos, la vivienda pública para las familias de muy bajos recursos.
Because that's the only housing we have, a public housing for people of very low income.
Can I interrupt here and bring Elizabeth into this conversation? Because you, too, are part of the Boyle Heights community. You were a slightly newer transplant into it,
Yes.
not quite 40 years, but you have been there a long time, been there a part of it. And one of the things you have said to me is that you feel that yours is a community threatened by what many people would see as progress from the outside.
Yeah, and so I think one of the important things to look at, I've been in Boyle Heights for 22 years now, is that you have to look at a bigger picture of what's going on in Boyle Heights. So if you look at the south side of Boyle Heights, you have 5,150 units of luxury housing being built over 70 acres. Then you go down to the west side and you have the LA River development, you have the demolition of the 6th Street Bridge, as well as parks that are being built to connect specifically to the Arts District downtown, and you have galleries that are entering in there. And then on the north side, you have, all along the Gold Line, there's 8 vacant lots being developed by the MTA with commercial space and all different kinds of levels of housing that's more for $60,000, $70,000 income earners. And then you have a hotel that's being built close to USC Medical Center. So if you see this whole picture of how we're surrounded by freeways and then we're surrounded by this development, you can't look at any one project specifically. You have to look at the complexity of all of that development that is happening at the same time. And when we talk about words like progress and improvement and making it better, I think really for us the criteria that we use is what is being lost or has been lost as a result of these projects coming in, and what is the use value for residents as opposed to the market value of the community and the commodification of our community.
Mott is here. His organization is, it's called Civic Enterprise. And I mean, you're really speaking to this. You develop. You are a developer. That does not, at least in your view, not make you a bad guy.
Sure, yeah. My job is often to be.
But you know, some people think that you are, so.
Yeah, no, my job is to be an evil developer sometimes, and to be a reasonable guy some other times. And I'm on the adjunct faculty at USC, looking at issues like this. And my concern, I don't actually know Boyle Heights very well, so I can't speak to that experience personally. But what I can say is that the whole narrative around change is a very troubled narrative. We don't know how to have a constructive conversation about the future. And you look at it coming from wealthy communities, things like the Neighborhood Integrity Initiative, where people are fighting to keep the luxury single-family city that they know. And you look at situations in Boyle Heights where people are fighting to save the community that they know. And what we don't have, what I should say in the context of all this, we have a planning system that engages a lot of people in a lot of conversations about the future, but doesn't have any power to control the future. And so you end up with a bunch of people on all sides of this equation hoping that they can influence change, and all of them feeling alienated from their own destiny. Yeah.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Just say, isn't that what zoning is for? Isn't that where organizations, communities understand, okay, we're going to set rules, and developers or anyone else who wants to come in must live by that?
Sure. A little known fact about zoning is the way we do it was invented by Herbert Hoover in 1927 when he was Secretary of Commerce, right before he gave us the Great Depression. He gave us zoning.
And Hoovervilles.
Yeah, and Hoovervilles. And it was a system designed to turn farms into single-family cul-de-sac housing estates. And it has never worked in cities. It's always, well, hello. I would say this is a metaphor for the Hoover-based zoning system right now, is what it does for cities. It's always promised people like Delmira a voice. And the way it works, it denies them a voice, because every time a project comes along, it has to break the zoning in order to proceed, whether it's a good project or a bad project. And so normal people who just want to see their future in a form they can recognize cannot rely on zoning. And it's not because developers are corrupt or politicians are corrupt or bureaucrats are incompetent or communities are NIMBYs. It's because the system was designed to turn farms into single-family homes, and it doesn't work in cities.
Paul, you have certainly looked at that carefully, how communities can develop in ways that are embracing of the past and the future.
I think for us to come up with solutions, to have a decent discussion, I think we need to understand the larger forces at work. Boyle Heights is at the center of a perfect storm. 3 macro changes. One is growing economic inequality, despite the most recent report. And what that means is that the top fifth is much more influential in terms of development. Where it develops, what develops, it's driving that development. The second thing is that that top fifth has a shift in its cultural orientation about the city. We're no longer as driven by going out to the dream suburban home. It is a dream about diversity within this core city in terms of access, in terms of having the ability to walk to work or to public transit. And the final thing is we have public policy that's supporting that. It's around the issue of sustainability, for example, and how we develop that. Unfortunately, in that discourse, the victims of all this are the neighborhoods that are most at risk, the neighborhoods that become attractive, neighborhoods that, in a sense, are located like Boyle Heights in areas for development. And so we need
Prime
to
locations for development, and a community maybe that doesn't have as much strength in the political.
both political and economic. So if we go back to inequality, you know, those with low income not only have stagnated income despite the most recent report, but their cost of living's gone up. Disposable income has gone down. And also it's political. You know, money, politics follow money to a certain degree. You know, it's a little crude, but that's the reality of it. And so the question is, how do we come up with solutions? How do we preserve neighborhoods? Given that it's not just a problem of Boyle Heights. We talked about this is happening in Washington, D.C., this is happening in Atlanta, this is happening in the Bay Area. It's not a coincidence, and it's because of these larger forces. And so we need to think about the larger forces and how do we sort of address it, as well as come up with localized solutions. that meets the need of a particular neighborhood, particular households. So we need a combination of both. Getting back to a balanced discussion, enlightened discussion, part of that has to be guided by our understanding what are the forces at work, how it gets played out here in Los Angeles, how it gets played out in Boyle Heights. And I think that understanding helps us in terms of thinking about how to balance. How do you, so for example, tap into development and change
Right.
to make sure that
and
the
I think
benefits
Matt,
flow?
Mott would like to be able to do that, to engage, right? I mean, that,
Sure.
but there, in some sense, maybe any development is problematic.
Yeah, well, I think I don't disagree with anything Paul said. The big challenge that we have is our system in California is based on taxing the future. We are set up where we assume that if you know, it's based on this farm model of development. If you're turning a farm into single-family homes, developers should pay for the schools and the roads and the fire stations and everything. And in cities, we still take that approach. We assume that the development coming into a neighborhood is responsible for treating it like it's a blank slate and should build it up from the bottom. And sometimes, I mean, that's true if you're talking about like the 5,100 unit development. That's a total game changer. But the sort of development that people want in their neighborhoods is incremental. I like to think there are two kinds of development: incremental and excremental. And the incremental kind is where there are people from the community who are able to participate in it, maybe building a second unit behind their homes, maybe opening up a small business. And our system is designed basically, it's a net that stops everything and unfortunately catches the little guy more than it catches the big guy, and makes it very difficult for that sort of neighborhood-based change to happen. And I think we all need to participate.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think really when we're talking about solutions and when we're looking at development is what is the lens that we're using? Are we using, typically what tends to be the lens are the interests of either politicians or developers, or like you're saying, the top 1/5%. And we never see the lens, and that's what we're doing in Boyle Heights, is trying to shift that lens. The lens should be from the people who are most impacted and the people who are the poorest in the community with the most need. If we start looking at development, if we start looking at solution, if we start looking at all of those projects that are around Boyle Heights and look at it from that lens, what would be built there and the services provided would be completely different. And it would be something that would truly address the needs of community members who are living there.
But can
That's the shift that I think needs
Can
to
I
happen.
play devil's advocate? Because the thing that you're talking about is you're talking about green spaces, you're talking about access to the community and things like that, which maybe for the larger community of Los Angeles might be more valuable than to say, okay, X number of streets or X number of houses in this community will be lost. Is there a way to do it where the answer isn't just we need you to stay out of our neighborhood?
Well, that's why I'm going back to looking at the lens and have the community members more shifting and defining that. So on a very small scale, for example, in one of our neighborhood committees, the problem they were having, we do a lot of work of transformation of public spaces on alleys and streets. And potholes, cars being wrecked because of how bad they were, speeding through the alleys, kids getting hurt. And so the first initial direction or solution is let's have a nice paved blacktop, let's put the stop signs up there. And as community members were looking at it, they're like, well, these are aesthetics that are more in a middle-class neighborhood that's going to make our community more marketable. So in the end of the day, what they came up with was they decided just to fill the potholes instead of repave it, put stop signs that were in the shape of triangles, painted blue, and in Spanish. So it increased that use value for those community members. It was through their lens and through their eyes of making the neighborhood better and improved in their eyes. And it didn't make it so much more marketable to other people coming into the neighborhood. So when we start shifting, that's the kind of development project that you're going to start being built. And I know that's on a very small scale, but imagine if you took that lens to everything else that was going on in Boyle Heights. It would be very, very different.
I think your ideas are great, and I fully support them, but we need to complement that. We need to understand that neighborhoods are part of the larger urban fiber. What happens in this region as a whole affects Boyle Heights. If we have constrictions and restrictions on the housing supply, it's going to spill over in terms of not having enough housing, not having enough affordable housing. So at the same time that we think about strategies for a particular neighborhood, what are the preferences? What are the priorities of the residents? We also need to tackle more structural issues for the regions as a whole, as well as the nation as a whole. So I think when we think about solutions, it is important to think at different levels. and how those different levels are tied together. That you can't solve neighborhood levels by itself without solving regional issues about its economy, about its housing policies, or the lack of housing policy, about affordability.
Mott wants to speak, but I want to encourage you because I see people nodding, and I want to encourage you to just a quick answer, but I know that there are other questions.
Yeah, I just want to underscore what Paul said completely, that if every neighborhood is out there trying to defend itself, it makes sense because they don't want the onslaught. And the simple way that I think about it is housing, really everything in the economy, the urban economy, is a game of musical chairs. And right now, when our space is constrained, the number of chairs are constrained. And in our system, the more money you have, the more you can buy a chair. And it's not the rich and the middle class who don't get to sit down when the music stops. It's the low-income people who don't get to sit down
Which is
anymore.
exactly what they're facing.
Exactly, which is why it really needs to be a regional solution by making sure there are enough chairs for everyone.
All right, the questions out there. I see hands going up. Sir, well, we got the microphone running.
My name is Michael Novick. I'm from New York, where urban renewal was once referred to as Negro removal. And I want to point out to people that quite a number of years ago, there was a book put out by, excuse me, Samuel Huntington for the Trilateral Commission, in which they defined what they called an excess of democracy. They felt that the U.S. was threatened because of rising demands from previously disenfranchised black, Puerto Rican, Mexicanos, and other people of color, and their strategy was called spatial deconcentration. It was a very conscious strategy of moving people out of the inner city into the decaying outer ring suburbs, and that's what you're seeing going on in Los Angeles now. If you get subsidized housing, they send you out to Lancaster and Palmdale with Section 8. And this is not just the market, this is a conscious white supremacist strategy that has to be addressed if you're going to deal with it.
You think that's true?
Yes. The unfortunate reality of our society is that things are racialized. Going back to zoning, you know the history of zoning comes from California. It comes from the effort to restrict Chinese in San Francisco, in Merced, in Modesto.
And
Boyle
Boyle Heights.
So this is heavy. I'm not saying zoning is all about race, but there's no mistake that race and ethnicity has a heavy overlay in terms of what society does, in terms of our public policy. I also want to say that solutions has to acknowledge the fact that what we do as a society, what we do through government investment, has an effect on housing, has an effect on who wants to live where. Putting in
And how
rail
people can
is
get
great.
jobs.
And who can get jobs.
And how they can get to their jobs.
And therefore, we have a responsibility
Ajá.
as a society, as a government, to make sure it's fair.
Delmira?
Sí. El área donde yo vivo está el puente que tiraron de las 6. Allí había muchos trabajos para la gente de bajos recursos. Entonces, todos esos trabajos, muchos ya se han ido y lo que están demoliendo, otros están vendiendo y
The area where I live, there was a bridge on 6th Street, and it was demolished. Under that bridge, there were a lot of small businesses and jobs for the local people. But now they are gone, and now they are demolishing a number of others.
pero los negocios que están viniendo allí no es beneficioso para la comunidad
Those new businesses that are coming are not beneficial for the community
porque son galerías.
because they are galleries.
Y nosotros no necesitamos galerías, nosotros necesitamos viviendas, trabajos, negocios para la gente que vive alrededor de
We
esta
don't need
área.
galleries, we need jobs, we need businesses for the people who live in the area.
Porque si todo eso se va a llenar de puras galerías, porque son bastantes,
Because
entonces Boyle Heights va a perder mucho.
If-
La
if that's-
pobreza va a ser peor.
If that place is going to be filled with galleries, we're going to lose a lot. You know, poverty is going to be more prevailing.
Nosotros no estamos de acuerdo con esos negocios de allí.
We disagree with those businesses.
Queremos
voices.
viviendas.
We want housing.
Okay, more voices now.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I actually work in this community planning for the city of Los Angeles, and I'm curious if the panel has any mechanisms that they see to develop affordable housing in communities while preserving communities? Like a very vague question for you.
Well, I mean, I
Mott
think-
wants to jump on that. Let's
Yes,
Well,
it's actually easy. We have to pay for it, and we have to pay for it as a community and not simply wait for a big developer to come along and ask them to pay for it. We need to commit to it as a community to pay for affordable housing. Second thing we have to do is to make it possible. My motto is before we make things mandatory, we need to start by making them possible. And right now, it's so difficult to build any kind of housing, let alone affordable housing, that it just doesn't happen unless there's huge money involved. We need to make it possible to build on parking lots, to build behind single-family homes through the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, et cetera. And we need to empower people with financial tools. One of the greatest ways to stabilize a community is to help people who are there build it out themselves without needing outsiders to come in and do it. So those three things could help a lot.
Sorry. Yeah.
I think there's also two other things when we're talking about affordable housing. One is the affordability of affordable housing. The way the tax credit model is structured right now, it really relies on building more affordable housing at upper levels, 40, 50, 60% of area median income, and fewer units, because of the subsidies, for extremely low income. That needs to shift completely. That needs to be turned upside down if we really want to address the problem. And I think the other part is that we have to preserve what we have. When we have rules like Ellis and Costa-Hawkins in the state of California that prevent and allow actually for demolishing rent-controlled housing. Rent-controlled housing is a form of affordable housing. In Boyle Heights, I mean, we have people who live there for 10 or 15 years. You can find somebody paying $450 for a one-bedroom apartment because they lived there for 16, 17 years. We need to preserve those units. We need to have universal rent control. We need to be able to make sure that our stock that we have now continues to be affordable to people in the city.
Another voice.
Hello, good afternoon. Oh, snap, sorry. I'm just really loud. My name is Eunices Hernandez. I'm with Drug Policy Alliance. And yo vivo en Highland Park, donde está ocurriendo mucho lo que está ocurriendo en su vecindario. So entiendo el dolor que está sintiendo. But you talk about bringing people to the table. But you also talk about reforming different levels of the structure. Well, how will you bring people that look like me and that only speak Spanish, or that look like some of us in the community that aren't really reached out to when you plan on building something, to kind of get more information on like what is it that you should be building if you do want to come into that neighborhood?
I don't know. I think maybe that was directed. I'm not sure. But I do think, I mean, you have talked about that.
Completamente. Hay que conocer todo el mundo que vive en los barrios donde yo trabajo. Yeah, my Spanish isn't so good, but yeah, absolutely. You can't build in isolation. And your job as a developer should be to go in and have a good relationship with the community where you are. We just built a project that brought 300 jobs to a low-income community. A lot of the people there are local. They don't even have to drive or even take transit to get to work, and that's the sort of thing that's important to do. I want to underscore one more thing that Elizabeth said. 90% of people in LA who live in low-income housing live in unsubsidized low-income housing. They just live in sort of market rate low-income housing. And actually, the number one thing we can do is to make it easier for people like me to get a house without taking it from somebody who's low-income. And so making it as easy as possible to build middle income, low income, high income. We need the full spectrum, or really nobody's safe.
Okay, another voice. We're running out of time. One more. Quick, no? Because otherwise, I'm gonna let Delmira talk if you.
Oh, sure. I just wanted to, I'm actually in Leimert Park, and I'm part of the flow of new businesses that are kind of trying to set up shop. And we have a major institution that has partnered with a real prominent artist to build galleries and such in the community. And I think Leimert is a really interesting circumstance because we have a lower income community and we have kind of an upper middle class income community that's in the View Park, Baldwin Hills, Windsor Hills area. And I think it would be a great study, which I'd love to recommend, but I think it would be also really cool to integrate academics, urban planning, those who are studying business and marketing, to kind of create research groups with these particular communities. And in the academics, diversify those who are participating.
Great.
So they can represent the interest of the communities.
I think Paul's trying to do that.
Okay, yeah, that would, in Leimert Park would be, because at the end of the day, you know, you have small businesses there and they rely on walkable traffic, pedestrian traffic. And so if you could kind of integrate that, I mean, you know, they hire within the community, or if you're going to have developers or people that are going to kind of buy up some of the spaces, commercial spaces, if they can also take that in consideration in hiring within the community or trying to incorporate all members of the community to kind of support the interest.
We can all work together in that.
So
Yeah.
your comment brings up two
Pero-
things. One is that we have to be sensitive to the fact that we have diverse communities. And what that diversity means is that our galleries may not fit in one neighborhood, but it may fit in a different neighborhood. The type of development that stakeholders want will vary across neighborhoods, different circumstances, and we have to be sensitive to that.
And this will be a model really
Yeah.
that is looked at around the country, because honestly,
Yeah.
this is a situation.
But the big problem is not that we recognize diversity, is who gets to express that diversity? How do we empower people, particularly stakeholders, so they can engage?
Well, unfortunately, nobody else gets to express their time because ours is out. So thank you all for being here, and thank you guys for engaging.